Good afternoon, members of council, Mayor Dyer, City Manager Dehaney. It's a pleasure to be here again today to talk about your EMS department. Folks regularly stop me and ask me, yeah, how do you do it? How can you provide ambulance services with primarily volunteer workforce? And I tell them it's two things. First, you have to have a group of people who are willing to come out and do this without a paycheck. And you have to partner with a city council that wants to invest what's needed into the system to make it work. So thank you for your continued support for EMS and for public safety. I'd just like to talk to you for a few minutes about our proposed budget, and as well as weave in some ongoing trends and kind of where I see things going in the future. As you can see, we've become a big department. Those FTE numbers is everything from assistants to instructors to 10.5 lifeguard FTEs for the Sandbridge lifeguards. We have a large volunteer force. That's the 378. That's the qualified people who are pulling duty on the ambulance today, which represents 76 full-time employees. And they're backed up by big groups of volunteers who are behind the scenes doing support work and also in the training pipeline. Now, our proposed budget is just under $17.5 million. Of that, just under $2 million is for the lifeguard contract at the resort, so that's essentially a pass-through to the contract that we manage. The biggest slice is operations. That's fuel, maintenance, risk management charges, and of course salaries for medics and officers. The next big slice is training. We do all the entry-level training for our volunteers coming in, but then continuing education for the volunteers, EMS, and also for the fire department ALS providers. What's not shown there is the millions of dollars of in-kind time given by the volunteers, and also the millions of dollars a year they spend in capital investment in vehicles and their 3 stations. So it's a huge boon for the taxpayers that's not represented. So moving on to the trends and issues, our call volumes have gone up 15% since 2016. That's driven up by a lot of factors that are really beyond the scope of this presentation, but I can say that as this city grows, our call demands are going to grow. There's just no stopping it. We've briefed you many times before about volunteer trends, and most recently that was my last budget presentation, and also in October we talked about the concept of vacancies. And at that time I talked about it's like a bathtub, that we are always flowing in new volunteers, but the drain is open at the bottom as people move on to other things in life, and you want the flow to be bigger than the drain, obviously. And so while we put a lot of work into recruiting retention over the years, and we're certainly welcome to new ideas. But for now, the volunteerism has been on the decline for about the past decade, just a kind of a steady decline, and COVID then hit us hard. It not only restricted the flow going into the bathtub, but also widened the hole at the bottom. And so while I hoped for some quick turnaround at the end of the pandemic, that hasn't materialized yet. So we've got some work ahead despite the efforts of our volunteer partners and my staff. And of course, you can't have more calls without it impacting service. The fewer crews answering more calls, they're running from call to call to call, crisscrossing the city. This wears on their morale and their health. And response times aside, another indicator of the workload is calls holding. Now, every EMS agency has some amount where they didn't have ambulances available, but for us last year, it was 11% of calls dispatched there wasn't an ambulance immediately available. That's far above our normal, and it creates a risk that needs immediate attention. So to show things graphically, sorry, I keep laser pointing you there. So to show things graphically, the blue bars are call volumes. So you can see them going up. Now 2020 is a blip. It went down because that was the early pandemic when people were afraid to call 911. The yellow, which is declining, that's the ambulance staffing. What's not shown there is as we've lost members, I've moved as many medics as possible from our zone car staffing to shore up that ambulance staffing, which then leads to longer ALS response times and also limits our ability to get into things like critical care response or for mental health crisis response initiatives that are really important. In this chart we show, again, this is now the staffing is in the blue, but this is our response time, and this is really a big thing here. The red line is our priority 1 calls, yellow is priority 2. And we do things differently than many cities. We measure from the time of the 911 call till the time the ambulance gets there. And we measured the 90th percentile, which means how did we do 9 times out of 10? Because that's the most representative for the patient. And it's a strict measure, and it's hard to achieve, but as you can see, last year for Priority 1, we went over 19 minutes for our 90th percentile for Priority 1. And in terms of how we did with our goal, which is 12, we only hit our goal 59% of the time for Priority 1 last year. So again, this is a level of service that requires some attention. Now this chart tells multiple stories. I just wanted to show you our workforce. The blue is our volunteers, and the kind of orange yellow is our career force. And I show this because, yes, you can see a little decline in our volunteers, but we've had a robust volunteer workforce for a long time. And going back to, some of you recall, 2004 and 5, when we first added the career staff, we added 32 medics. And since that time, in the 17 years since then, we've only added 16. So basically one medic a year on average. And those 16 were added because we added the Thalia Station and we're adding the Burton Station facility. Because we couldn't go to the volunteers, say, hey, we're opening new stations, you might want tomorrow come up with 100 more people. So I show that the final story is that we have had career staff with our volunteers working together successfully for a long time now. So today, we're providing great care and supporting many programs. You know, with these stats, there's things we need to do, but you can be proud of your EMS department and the rescue squads. We're working hard as a city and a department to help the rescue squad succeed, and we're always looking at ways to get them new members faster. And I'm really proud to note that we were an early adopter of the VB Rescue brand. That's the new unified brand put forth by the Virginia Beach Rescue Squad Foundation. Because we believe that unified marketing and public awareness is going to be the key to our success going forward. So I do see great things ahead. So for this budget, though, I have 3 prongs. One is kind of back-of-house infrastructure. Things like our lifeguard contract has an annual escalation clause of 3%, so we need to fund that. Also some additional funding for volunteer recognition programs. Secondly is our advanced EMT training program. And advanced EMTs is an interim level above a basic EMT that can do a lot of what a paramedic can do, so it's a force multiplier. But it does require significant infrastructure to offer the class. We've had a lot of interest over the year from our volunteers and from the fire department to offer this program. So it's a standalone project. I'm proud to say that last week we were notified we received provisional accreditation to do this. So as soon as the resources are in place, we're going to hit it. The big one, though, is we've asked for career staff. I'm asking for paramedics and advanced EMTs, a mix. I could argue for an even bigger ask. Many of you will recall I sent a report via the city manager last fall talking about our long-term strategy. But I believe in an incremental approach. I think that an interim addition of these career staff gives us time, buys time to look and see what we can do with recruiting and retention in a post-COVID world. So this is a measured response to see what we can do before we go any further. So since that's a big ask for people, I know it's a sensitive issue, so I do want to address some of the things we did look at beforehand because this has come up. Call demand. Every EMS agency wrestles with call demand, and there is no holy grail to make it go away. There's a lot of programs out there that show promise, such as community paramedicine, but the bottom line is when people tell you about unnecessary calls, that's often in the eye of the beholder. So even if we could put programs in place and cut our call volume by 20%, I still could show you a need for 14 ambulances to meet the rest of the calls, and the best we've ever done is an average of 12, and that was back at about 2013. Contracting for services. There are no local vendors that have idle resources. If we were to go out with an RFP, which would take about a year timeline, go out with an RFP to a private company, they would have to buy ambulances, hire staff, build infrastructure, and we'd have to pay for all that and their profit. So I would dare say that we would better have that money invested into our own community. And the idea of contracting an individual or hiring temps for public safety just really isn't a solution for public safety in our city. We did naturally look at expanding recruitment. We have to do that. We must expand recruiting. It's just something we can't count on immediately. I think there's opportunities, but looking at the difficulties in finding full-time and part-time employees in the city and in the economy, the idea of just an overnight expansion of an uncompensated workforce is just not realistic. but I think there are opportunities, and EMS and our volunteer partners are committed to recruiting for the long term. So to conclude, I've asked you before, or told you before, about the need for some bold moves. We need to act to sustain service and our rescue squads. But I'm not reinventing the wheel here. Some of you were on council when we faced this challenge before. We had declining numbers, increasing calls, increasing response times, and some problems with public confidence. And so what we did with the city, council, everybody got together, and we added those medics in 2004 and 2005. Sure, there were some anxieties and there were some bumps, but it worked. Very quickly, we restored confidence, restored service, and the volunteers thrived. The volunteers thrived under that, and they did that in a major part because there was a major shift at that time to put more into recruiting, and we got to our highest staffing ever in 2013 without adding, as I've shown you, without adding any more career staff. So why did things turn around? It's all about staffing. If there's one thing you take away from me today, is staffing drives retention. Having plenty of crews on the street, it helps morale, it helps with fatigue, it makes it manageable, makes it enjoyable for our volunteers and, quite frankly, for our career staff. We've seen it before, and I hope to see it again. So, as I noted, this is an interim approach with the career staff, and I really look forward to seeing what the rescue squads and the foundation can do to energize recruiting. And we'll adapt our plans accordingly based on how that works out. So, in conclusion, once again, thank you for all your support on behalf of all the men and women of Beach Rescue and Beach EMS.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Rocky?
Chief, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing, and this is certainly a big issue that affects all public safety because when fire and police are on scene, they're waiting on rescue to get there, and,
Sure.
and they could be tied up. So it's certainly something that we need to get a handle on. Now, I'll go back to slide 10, where it says contract for services. Is there a cost advantage to using that, to doing contracting?
I've not found one, no, sir. I mean, again, the startup cost would be extreme because you'd have to buy their equipment, or they'd have to buy the equipment, we'd have to pay them for it. So, and then again, they're all for-profit companies, so it'd be expensive. And if I could point out, you mentioned police and fire waiting. That's the one thing that in that time, those long response times, we have a great network with first response with police and the fire department. So people are getting great care, but it requires everybody together.
Working together. So if you added more career folks, what do you think it'll do to your volunteerism? Is it going to help, hurt, or what?
I think it's going to help because it's going to put more ambulance on the street. People are asking for relief. We just to be able to get a pace where they can get a meal, some downtime between calls. It's gonna be a win, and we've proven it before.
Yeah. Well, Chief, thank you for your folks and all the work they're doing, and like I told Director Lee, keep hammering away. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ed, I just wanted to, Barbara.
Just a comment. Our folks tend to overlook the savings that this department provides. Nobody gets a bill.
No, ma'am.
Nobody has ever gotten a bill for an ambulance call in Virginia Beach. And that's steep for people who have to pay that. And what you all provide, and I think we, the citizens, take it for granted and just really don't appreciate enough what this service saves individuals in cost. And I'm sure y'all have calculated how much, if you charge for each call, it would generate. We don't want to go there. But I think our volunteers and this department just deserve so much thanks from all of our citizens for providing this service. You don't have to sit around and say, I can't afford to call because I can't pay that. I mean, people can call and they're going to get the same service that everybody gets, and that's worth a whole lot. We thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And Ed, let me just say, in a prior lifetime, I used to be a hospital administrator up in New Jersey, and one of the biggest wake-up calls I ever had was you found out that when you call an ambulance, even after the patient is stabilized, transported, and admitted, there's a tremendous amount of restocking, cleanup, and especially during the COVID, that you may have an ambulance out of service for dare I say, a couple hours sometimes.
Yes, sir. Turnaround times are a big factor in availability.
Yeah. So, but once again, I think it bolsters the argument, to do something. But I don't think, people just not pick up, deliver, and on to the next one. It's not a mass unit, and, God bless you. Rosemary, and then Guy.
With what Barbara was saying, most of y'all know that I'm a realtor, and I had a closing one time. It was with one of our sister cities, and I'm not going to name which one it was, but it got held up because there was a lien on the property because the wife had died, and the ambulance had come to pick the wife up and hadn't gotten paid, and they put a
Wow.
lien on the property. So it did get paid, it did get closed, but wow, that would not
big deal.
happen. It's kind of sad to think about, isn't it? And that wouldn't happen here.
Guy?
Thank you for all the work you guys are doing. I think everybody in Virginia Beach that's aware of it anyway, and that's most people I know now deeply appreciate how lucky we are to have the services that we do have and the cost benefit. I received, and I assume other members of council received, a letter from Ms. Miaris this week. And I'm just wondering if, have you seen the letter that we got from her?
I've
Foundation.
seen some correspondence. I'm not sure it's
Okay,
the
well,
same one.
it's unfair for me to ask you to comment on it if you haven't seen it, but I would like to have your comments on it once you've seen it and have the chance to absorb it. I'm not sure I understand all of it, and maybe some comments from you would
Yeah,
help clarify that.
I think I probably have seen it, but I'm not for sure. There's a lot of concern anytime we add career staff into a system. What's the impact of the volunteers? What's the message we're sending the community? And so I respect that concern and that viewpoint. It's my role to minimize that and to find ways to maximize the use of the volunteers to the greatest extent possible. And I believe that's what this budget does. I think there's some other ideas that they've got that maybe we can work into this midstream that can make it an even better plan.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Okay,
Go ahead, Sabrina.
Good afternoon, Chief Brazle. Thank you for your outstanding leadership as well as your staff. There's a question that I'm just pondering while I'm sitting here, and I appreciate what you said about the incremental approach and looking for volunteers. And I'm just wondering, I know that things have changed and the volunteer, they haven't decreased substantially, but there has been a decrease. And just with the pandemic, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? Do you think that approach will be widely successful? And if not, what would be, I guess, the alternative for that?
Well, I'm optimistic that we're going to see some growth. Will it be way out there off the chart beyond 2013 growth? I don't know. I think we've got to be smarter about how we're targeting folks now, there's a different motivations for people to volunteer. I think we do have to get people over any of the fears they have about working in a COVID environment. Really over the past couple of years, we haven't put really, I hate to say expert, but really we're talking, there's talk about bringing in some heavy consultants to really look at this and the brand. I think to Mr. Tower's comment, I appreciate that most people, that it's volunteer. I think there's a lot of people in this community that our transient part of our community doesn't know. And so by switching to this notion of VB Rescue, that it's its whole group, and we'll all have it on our apparatus in some fashion, that people will see this unified system. So I'm encouraged of what fruit that will bear. But to answer your question, if we can't bring in the numbers, then we will have to look at other alternatives. And I'm committed to looking at all that beyond just coming back here and saying more people, more people, more people. There's many pathways that we can take in addition to the people.
Thank you very much.
thank you, Barbara.
No, it's fine.
Okay, anybody else? Once again, thanks for being part of the team that makes Virginia Beach safe.
Yes, sir. Happy
Thank
to.
you.